Good evening, everyone. I think we're going to get going. On behalf of Salem Alliance for the Environment, welcome to our program tonight, featuring three regional speakers, local and regional speakers. My name is Barz-Snell. I am a co-leader of Salem Alliance for the Environment, along with Pat Kazema, and serve on the board with several other folks who are here tonight. Salem Alliance for the Environment was formed just after 9/11 by Pat and Karen and a small group of folks to think about and raise awareness of the ecological and environmental dimensions of global problems here on a local basis. To think about how global trends affect local decisions and local impacts and development in a way. We're delighted tonight to be hosting an event that is both global and local in nature, and regional actually. The real controversy has been a regional basis. Tonight we're going to focus on our local water supply here on the North Shore. And we have Wayne Castonguay, who's Executive Director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association, who is speaking to us. Most people in Salem and Beverly seem to not be fully aware of how dependent we are on the Ipswich River. Indeed, it is the Ipswich River which is the source of our drinking water here in Salem and Beverly, and Lynn to some extent, Danvers, Hamilton, Wenham, a variety of different communities north of Boston. We actually are blessed here in Salem and Beverly with an excellent drinking water supply system that was built in the 1920s and involves Wenham Lake. Wenham Lake is actually the storage area for our water supply here in Salem and Beverly, and it's a darn good one, I have to say. I'm a big believer in our local water supply. Hence our concern about the proposed gas pipelines and the routes that were proposed to come here in the northeast section of Massachusetts and potentially affect our water supplies in the form of affecting the Ipswich River. So we are delighted to have Cathy Kristofferson here, who is the lead organizer for Stop the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline, StopNED, and has a long and impressive track record as an advocate, environmental advocate, and social justice advocate here in Massachusetts. So we're delighted to have her here tonight. I've heard Wayne and Cathy do a version of this presentation in Lynn last winter, early spring, and I thought it would be great to bring it here to Salem and to tape it, have it videotaped so that we can put it on SETV and make sure that our local officials see it. YouTube. And YouTube, it'll be on YouTube, that's right. In addition though, we wanted to hold up a key connection between gas pipelines and water supply, and that has to do with herbicides. Quite often the gas pipelines that are built apply an herbicide along the route of that pipeline in order to retard the vegetation that grows inevitably around them. It's actually much cheaper than using manual labor to go back and cut back brush and the like. And there is an ongoing concern about the runoff from that herbicide. Many folks in the industry say it's not an issue. It's been used for years. This sort of protocol, this sort of application has been done for decades, so it's fine. Some of us, though, are concerned and asking questions. In fact, a growing group of people around the country are asking questions. Last month, there was a report of a study that found that glyphosate, which is the active chemical in Roundup, glyphosate was found in the urine of 93% of Americans, which is pretty impressive for a chemical compound that's supposed to break down over the course of the 14 days in the natural world and not really have an effect on other aspects of the ecosystem other than just killing immediate plants in the vicinity. The World Health Organization's Cancer Agency has labeled glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. The European Union is currently in the process of putting restrictions on use of glyphosate because of health concerns, and member states are looking to apply much stricter regulations of the chemical in the EU. Indeed, in the EU, and actually if you go up to Canada, when you go to buy Roundup, you'll find it's behind a large metal cage. It's a regulated substance. You actually have to get a permit to even buy the herbicide in both Canada and the EU. Here, you can just go to Home Depot and pick up a jug and start squirting. Have at it. So we have Erin Bennett, who's a Salem resident, father of 3, and local guy, but also an environmental chemist and a toxicologist who's worked for a variety of different engineering firms, consulting firms, doing this sort of consulting on contamination concerns and different projects and the like. And he's also the editor of a scholarly journal, and the name of it escapes me. What is it called?
Bulletin of Environmental Contamination Toxicology.
Okay, what he said. So he has a PhD in chemistry. This man knows what he's talking about, and he's a fun speaker to do it. So we're delighted to have all 3 of them here tonight to give us brief presentations. We're going to start with Wayne. He's going to paint a picture of what our water supply is locally. Then we're going to move to Erin, and he's going to talk a little bit about the chemistry and glyphosate, and then we're going to finish off with Cathy. I will say that at the end of this program, we are going to be mentioning that there is a bill in the Senate, Massachusetts Senate right now, the Omnibus Energy Bill, that is actively being negotiated tonight, tomorrow, and it probably will be voted upon on Thursday. And there are several key provisions in that bill that all of us should be concerned about and advocating for and calling our state senators regarding. And I have information about the bill and about some of the different pieces, amendments that all of us should, or I encourage all of us to consider calling our state senator about. To date, I believe there have been 114 to 115 amendments to this bill. The utilities, the energy lobbyists are very active this week and last week, trying to get this bill to be more industry friendly. And it's important for local citizens who represent simply the interests of their own community, also pay attention and advocate. So all that is will be available on the table. We also have laminated cookies. I encourage you all to join us for an informal conversation after the program. Bathroom is right there in the hallway, and I think that's it. I'm going to introduce or welcome up Wayne Castonguay.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It was a great introduction, and for once when I come to Salem, I don't have to explain why the heck the person talking about the Ipswich River is here in Salem, but Jeff did a great job explaining to you all why Ipswich River is important to Salem, and hopefully after my talk, you'll have a great appreciation why Salem should care about the river. So as Jeff indicated, my name is Wayne Castonguay. I'm the director of the Ipswich River Watershed Association. We're a member-supported nonprofit. We rely 100% on donations and memberships. We don't get any governmental support. And our job is simply to look out for the Ipswich River. As you all may know, it's an incredible resource. We like to think it's one of the crown jewels of the North Shore. And it's just a beautiful place. It's a place of inspiration. It's a great wildlife habitat. 50% of the watershed is protected conservation land. Lots of rare endangered species. It's also an economic engine. Over $1 million worth of clams are harvested out of the river every year. It's a great place for boating and recreation and fishing, and just a real great place to get outdoors. But, as Jeff indicated, the biggest asset is it's literally the lifeblood of the North Shore. Without the Ipswich River, most of our cities and towns simply could not exist because there's no more important resource to underpinning our society than clean drinking water. Without clean drinking water, we wouldn't have anything. So here's a map of the watershed, and for those of you who don't know that technical term, every bit of land is part of a watershed, so rainwater falls on land and eventually makes its way to your local river and stream. This yellow area is the Ipswich River watershed. We have about 21 cities and towns that make up the watershed, and a lot of people may not realize it, but it has its headwaters way up here in Bill Rickett in Burlington. Those of you who drive down 128, the big Burlington Mall, Jordan Marsh, for a lot of you will probably remember that, now Macy's. The Ipswich River begins right behind that parking lot and then travels about 45 miles to Ipswich Bay. Just a little bit about ourselves. We're like any nonprofit watershed association. We're primarily in advocacy. Our organization, our tagline is "We're the voice of the river." Obviously, the river can't speak up for itself, and that's basically our job. But we do a lot of other things. We do a lot with monitoring and science. We firmly believe that you can't do anything without good data, good information. We pride ourselves on having the best, top-notch, detailed science to make our decision making. So everything you're going to hear is really science-based, peer-reviewed. We have a journal editor in the back. He knows what that's all about. So everything we say and do is really based on fact. We're a very small organization, very small budget. We're largely volunteer-driven. So we work a lot with volunteers, and in particular youth groups. They're really the engine of our work. We do a lot of education and organizing. We do a lot of youth programs, we do a lot of events, and really just trying to get more and more people aware of what we do. And then finally, and more recently, we're really focused on getting people on the river. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to convince you all to take the drive 20 minutes north. Actually, in Peabody, you can get there without traffic in 10 minutes from downtown Salem. If you get out there and enjoy it, you'll learn to love it. That's sort of our newest way of getting out there. I want to talk about a couple of the issues in particular. Like any natural resource, you've heard about it in the news. We're having more and more impact on our environment, whether it be our oceans, our air. The river obviously has lots of issues. I want to talk just about two of the many issues facing the river, and really some of the things we focus on to try to protect the river for future generations. One is water pollution. Again, without clean water, we couldn't exist. So water pollution is perhaps our biggest threat. So we do a lot of work to keep the river clean. I'm happy to report the Ipswich River, given that there are 3 million people that live within half a mile of the river, it's one of the cleanest rivers in New England. In actuality, the Ipswich, as it flows into downtown Ipswich, is cleaner than any stream in the Berkshires, if you can believe that. So we're really fortunate that it's so clean. And the reason for that is the second issue, is water. As I said, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about water supply. We're actually loving the river to death, unfortunately, because so much of the North Shore was developed 400 years ago. Ipswich River was tapped for public drinking water supply early on. We have some big cities and towns that depend on the river, and some of the earliest municipal water supply systems in the entire country were developed first here in the Ipswich River. And back then, we didn't really understand the relationship between our impacts and the environment, so the state just let anyone take as much water as they wanted. And as a result, there's too much water being withdrawn from the river right now. So water withdrawals are our biggest concern, because without water, you don't have a river. So that's the thing we work on the most. So I'm going to talk about water withdrawals mostly, and then how it relates to development and some concerns we have. So right now, in the state, local, and the federal government, they classify waterways by many different classifications. The first bullet here, back in 2003, a national rivers organization called American Rivers actually ranked the Ipswich River the third most endangered river in America. Can you believe that? Our little river here on the North Shore. And that's because it's over-allocated. There's far too much water coming out. Back then, when this dubious award was given to us, the upper half of the river would dry up every single summer, if you can believe that, because too much water is being withdrawn. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, their term for water quality is levels of impairment. So parts of the river are impaired under the Federal Clean Water Act, mostly the upper river, basically the Macy's parking lot at Burlington Mall I talked about. All of that highly developed impervious area flows into the Ipswich River. And you can imagine all the oil and grease on 128, all of that, every time it rains, gets flushed into the river. So the upper river in particular, where it's really developed, is impaired due to primarily stormwater runoff. And then this third category is how the state classifies rivers in terms of how much water is coming out. It's called highly stressed. It's one of the most highly stressed rivers in the state. In fact, the most highly stressed river from the state classification. Again, there's just too much water coming out. So I'm going to focus mostly on our water supply. That's what we're here for tonight, and talk about impacts of projects such as pipelines on it. So I said earlier that Ipswich River is literally the lifeblood of the North Shore, and here's why. 34 million gallons a day are pumped out of the river for drinking water. 14 communities depend on it for drinking water. Here on the left, the bigger cities here have reservoirs. They essentially fill their reservoirs from the river. And then the smaller towns here rely on groundwater. They withdraw water continually from the river, usually in wells right next to the river, which more or less withdraw directly from the river. Think about that. Almost 350,000 people and businesses, 5 million gallons every single day come out of that little river. This is a graph of who takes what. You might not be able to see it, but here, I'll just read it quickly. So this is Ipswich, Linfield, Wenham, Topsfield, Hamilton, North Reading, Wilmington. Now we start really going up. Danvers and Middleton, they share a water system. Peabody, then Lynn, and then you guys, the big one, Salem, Beverly. I don't know how many of you know it, but Salem and Beverly have a shared water system run by a utility called the Salem Beverly Water Board. And it's a separate authority. They don't really report to cities and government. They're set up that way to insulate themselves from politics. And they're one of the oldest water suppliers, public water suppliers in America. They've been at it since the late 1800s, if you can believe it. And so you guys are the big user, about 12 million gallons a day from Salem and Beverly. This is really hard to see tonight, and I don't want you to see the detail, but this is the watershed, and all these little dots, you can probably make those out, are public water supply withdrawal points throughout the watershed. Almost every tributary, every aquifer along the river, there's well over 100 places where all these 14 cities and towns take their water. And then the big issue are these black lines here out of the reservoirs. So this one goes to Burlington, this goes to Lynn, this goes to Peabody, to Danvers, and then here's you guys, Salem and Beverly. And the reason those lines leaving the watershed are such a big concern is after we use that water and we flush it down our drains or put it in our yards and gardens, that never goes back into the watershed. It's lost to the watershed forever. The water that comes to Salem, for example, ends up in Salem Sound, whereas the best thing would be for us to use the water and then put it back into the ground in the watershed so it can recycle. So that's why we have such a big problem. 80% of the water that's withdrawn every day leaves the watershed forever, and that's why we have such a problem with water withdrawals. In just a little more detail, looking at some of the familiar faces here, I apologize. I know a lot of you know where you get your water from, so bear with me for those who don't. I think most people know that you get your water from Wenham Lake, and that's true. And for about the first 20 years, in the late 1800s when you started getting your water, it provided Salem with all of its water right from that natural lake. Wenham Lake, for those of you who don't know, is a natural lake. It's called the Great Pond by the Native Americans. It has an incredible history. It was a huge industry actually back in the 17 and 1800s, ice. And it was a huge source of ice. Before refrigeration, ice was really critical to our society. And Wenham Lake had the reputation for the best ice in the world. Several generations of kings and queens in England before the Revolution imported their ice from Wenham Lake, if you could believe that, because it was such a status symbol. And then in the late 1800s, as Salem grew, you first started getting your water from Wenham Lake. But as I said, by 1900, it was pumped dry. And a little lake like that can't possibly supply. So what you guys did is you built this canal right here that basically connects the Ipswich River to Wenham Lake. And so 99% of the water in Wenham Lake comes from the Ipswich River, and that's how you replenish supply. But over time, Longham Reservoir here in Beverly was created by damming a small tributary to the Ipswich River, and so that water now is pumped into Wenham Lake. And then in 1954, Putnamville Reservoir here in Danvers was built. It's not a natural lake at all. It's basically a storage reservoir, an open tank essentially. And so what is done is Wenham Lake is pumped uphill to Putnamville Reservoir to store it. So basically, November through Memorial Day, these pumps run all the time, filling these lakes to provide your water. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about water pollution and try to segue to the rest of the program here. One of our big jobs, as I said earlier, is to protect the river from water pollution and contamination. And a big part of that job is to monitor every development project in the watershed. So every housing project, every factory, every road, literally every project that's done in the watershed, we play an active role to protect and make sure that that development won't harm the river. It's our biggest job, and to basically protect your water supply. And then a few years ago, this bad boy came along, the Kinder Morgan Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline. And like any project, we got involved to protect the river. And so we review every project, and we started getting involved with this thing. And the more we learned, the more worried we became. And we determined that this project was going to be the single biggest development project in the history of the Ipswich River watershed. And, as I'll tell you, or make the case anyway, by far the most damaging. So we got very concerned. This project literally consumed our organization for the last year. So here's the pipeline, and you'll hear a lot more about this from Cathy later, but it comes all the way from Pennsylvania through Dracut, and then Dracut's up here to the left near Lowell, and then here is the pipeline coming through our watershed. This purple line is the edge of the watershed, essentially the western half of the watershed you saw earlier. So the pipeline would come through here, Tewksbury, through Wilmington, across to Linfield, Reading and North Reading, through Linfield again, Peabody, and Danvers. And it was meant to basically end in Danvers at existing pipelines. So that was its route. And the impacts were really incredibly dramatic. As I said earlier, we thought this was the biggest development impact in the history of our watershed. 11 miles would be constructed through the watershed. It would traverse miles of wetlands, cross the river, cross several tributaries, be built through several vernal pools. And the reason for all of this impact is we're fairly well developed here on the North Shore. So they don't want to put these things near people, because the more people they put it near, the more opposition they're going to have. So the only places left to build these things are where nature is, basically where our water supply protection areas are, where the river is, where the wetlands, and as you'll see, these hash marks are all of our public water supply protection areas. These areas are put aside to keep our drinking water clean, and these green areas are conservation areas. So you can see they essentially went from one conservation area to the other to avoid people. One of the other biggest impacts is for 3 miles of its length, they were going to go right down the riverbank, literally down the river with this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Literally within feet of 7 public water supply impacts. And when I mean feet, I'm serious. Within the size of this room, where we would withdraw water, they were going to build this pipeline for 7 of our communities. The construction impacts were immense. They have to clear a 100-foot wide swath, remove every single thing in its path for construction. And then in perpetuity, which means forever, they have to maintain a permanently cleared 50-foot swath because they can't risk any tree roots growing into it. So that is a permanent scar on our landscape. And as Jeff said, and we'll hear a lot more about, because the area is so physically demanding, it's wet usually, it's through swamps and river, you can't physically mow it. So the only tool we have available is herbicides to keep the trees from growing. And then finally, it would have devastating impacts with recreational areas, buffer zones, and all of our conservation areas. So you can see why we got a little concerned. This area, I know from the back you really can't see it, but I'm just going to use this to highlight one little stretch along the river. So here's the Ipswich River here in blue, and this is West Peabody, Danvers on the right, Winfield on the left, and this green line is the pipeline. You can see they're going to build it right down the river through almost all of Peabody. This green area is all endangered species habitat. This blue area is the critical aquifer for the town of Danvers' drinking water wells. This green box right here is the pump station for 100% of the city of Peabody's drinking water, literally feet from the pipeline. And then this is almost all conservation area. You can just imagine the level of impacts this pipe would have had. And this was repeated for 11 miles along the river. Yes?
So the red lines that parallel it, are they the distance that it's going to be, that has to be cleared away?
That's called one of their many different zones. That's more than 100 feet wide. That's called the blast zone, or Cathy, help me with that. It's one of the safety zones.
Yeah, the incineration zone.
Incineration zone. The question was what the red lines were, and what that denotes. So I just put this up to give you just a little flavor of just one little short stretch. So what we concluded when we did all of our analyses, if you recall when I started, we really pride ourselves on technical data, and we really looked into this with our experts and folks like our partners, like Cathy and her group, is we concluded that it's impossible to mitigate all of these impacts. Developers will always say, we'll fix our damage. It's always going to be temporary. The gas developers always say that. And in many cases, that's possible and feasible. In this case, there's no way to physically mitigate these impacts. So these are permanent impacts. And as you can see, these really are unacceptable, particularly as you add them up. There's no way to mitigate the amount of impact that we're going to have on our aquifers. They had the potential to literally dry up a lot of these aquifers. The 3 miles of riverbank clearing that I mentioned earlier, Ipswich River, I don't know how many of you are fishermen, but Ipswich River is famous for trout fishing. Trout are what's called a cold water species. They like cool water. And how does a river in the warm North Shore stay cool through the summer? Shade. So trees along the riverbank are critical. We've concluded scientifically that this clearing would have eliminated any possibility of the river to support trout, because it would increase the water temperature by over 10 degrees in the summer above their lethal zone. So that fishery that's existed for hundreds of years, gone, never to come back. And then you can imagine what taking trees along the river would do to the ecology. There's no way to replicate this amount of wetlands damage, miles and miles of construction through a wetland. Vernal pools, there were over 40 vernal pools that this would destroy, and a lot of folks won't believe this, but not once in history has anyone been able to replicate a vernal pool. Once you damage a vernal pool, mankind just hasn't figured out how to fix those. And so this would have destroyed well over 40 vernal pools. Every one of these pipelines leaks. Guaranteed, even the developers say that, so can you imagine the risk of that? We're going to talk a lot more about herbicides. Forest fragmentation. A lot of animals and plants require intact blocks of forest. When you put a swath right through the forest, it really has devastating impacts to that adjacent forest land. One of those obviously is the great path for invasive species to invade, and then permanent construction impacts that can't be mitigated. So none of these things could be fixed, no matter how much money you threw at it. So you can see, as a result, we were fairly opposed, and I just put this to pique at your interest for Erin's talk next. For the amount of area that they had to use herbicides to keep this path clear, we estimated that be in the thousands of pounds every single year they would have to use. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that impact why we're so concerned. And then the other factor, and Cathy will talk about this a little bit, but I wanted to bring this up just to contrast that we're not a bunch of environmental wackos or alarmists. We already have a brand new pipeline servicing all of the North Shore that was built in 2002. This green line here called the Maritimes and Northeast. Brand new. Today, it's less than 50% utilized. There's enough capacity in this brand new line to serve Essex County for another century, including the new Salem power plant. And when this came through our watershed just about 13 years ago, we had a completely different stance. We didn't oppose it. We worked with them to mitigate the impacts because it was environment, it was put in a good spot. Relatively, it largely followed power line clearings. It crossed the river instead of coming down the river. So we worked with them. We didn't oppose it, and it was built and it's supplying our gas today. But in the context of this, the fact that we have enough gas for a century and there's room for 50% more growth in this brand new pipeline, why on earth do we need another one to really destroy the river?
Why didn't they follow this, why didn't they just put another pipeline right next to it?
They couldn't. They used up their available space, so that's why they had to go. And Cathy will touch on some of that. So that's a great question, but they have to separate them, and so the existing power line where this one goes didn't have room for another one. So unfortunately. And then obviously we concluded that this possibly can't be done, so we came out and brought opposition. I know a lot of you have heard that Kinder Morgan has withdrawn their application, which is a real great news. So we've breathed a sigh of relief, but we're really keeping up our guard because this thing could resurface at any moment, and I think Cathy will make that case. What was interesting, and again to make the case that it's not just the environmentalists, every city and town along its route was formally opposed. And we have a lot of conservative towns in our watershed, and having selectmen and city councils take a stand like this was virtually unprecedented. And virtually every organization along its route was opposed. Nobody wanted this thing. We didn't need it, so we're really happy that it was withdrawn. And with that, I think I'll stop because we've got two much more enlightened speakers on the details coming up. But I just wanted to lay the groundwork about why we were so concerned, and hopefully why you should all be concerned when things come knocking at your water supply. So with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. That was awesome. I learned a lot more than I knew about it. So I've done quite a bit of research just around the Ipswich River, and I didn't realize the actual location of the pipeline and the potential impact herbicide application could potentially have on the water supply. We're really switching gears here. I wasn't sure what to talk about tonight. Look up. Speak louder.
Louder.
Okay. I'm usually really loud, but anyway, that's funny that I'm quiet. But I think it's important for especially members of SAFE and different groups of the community, they understand what these pesticides, what the chemistry behind them and how they move in the environment. I think it's a really important piece of the process as you're looking at alternatives. In this case, my background is looking at best management practices to reduce pesticide loadings into aquatic environments. So this is kind of ties into what my PhD research was about. I've had the luck of working throughout Canada, Mississippi Delta, in South Africa, and in Germany, looking at different best management practices and different applications, more of the hands-on applied processes, and kind of some of the things that Wayne brought up, like storm water management. A lot of best management practices go into that to protect water supplies, etc. But like I said, we're switching gears. I kind of made this is an overview of glyphosate. What the heck is this stuff? How does it move in the environment? So basically, how does it behave? So glyphosate, everyone knows, it's generally known as Roundup. This is a product that's been around since the early 70s. In my job, I'm editor-in-chief of a chemistry journal, and looking back, there's been quite a few papers on glyphosate within this journal. The journal I work for is 50 years old, so they've been around just post Rachel Carson, pre-EPA. So it's a nice journal to see how pesticides, in this case a herbicide, have been tracking in the environmental literature. A lot of it's more toxicologically related, I'm an environmental chemist. I am familiar with toxicology, but I think it's important we talk about the chemistry today. And then maybe we can dabble in the question period about the more toxicity or the toxicity of this compound in various organisms. So it's a broad spectrum herbicide. That means it kills lots of things. It's really good for broadleaf, weeds, grasses, and woody plants. In this case, it ties in woody plants for a pipeline. They want to keep roots from penetrating or getting near the pipeline. So this is, of course, this is one of the reasons they use this product. A lot of people ask me when you're talking about pesticides, in this case the herbicide, so what's it doing in the environment? Like what's it doing to the plant? So this type of herbicide is actually, it's sprayed in many cases, so it's in liquid form, goes onto the leaves of the plant and goes through the stoma. The stoma is basically where you have respiration of a plant, so that's where it breathes, and essentially. So it can go through there or through the plant cuticle itself. And what this does, it actually blocks, of course, many of you know, you probably know these amino acids, very important building blocks for protein. I'll keep this really simple. There's this, it's called EPSP synthase, and glyphosate goes in and actually blocks this and doesn't let this reaction happen. Therefore, you don't, these amino acids are not developed, therefore the plant will die. So it's quite interesting the way that system works. A lot of pesticides actually work on the photosystems, which always fascinated me. Let's shut down photosynthesis. That's how we live. Without photosynthesis, we're done. So it's quite interesting. A lot of herbicides look at that mechanism of disrupting photosystem 1 or photosystem 2 within the chloroplast. Glyphosate is the parent compound. It's fairly readily, in certain conditions, broken down to amino-methyl phosphonic acid, the AMPA. I'm sure some of you may have heard of this. So just to give you an idea, and I'll talk a bit about how it breaks down. So as a chemist, when you're looking at any compound, you want to know its physical chemical properties. So, and this helps chemists like myself, or even pharmaceutical chemists, on how, say, a drug is going to get into the body, stay in the body, not stay in the body. In this case, what's going to happen in the environment. Herbicides, generally, are very water soluble, which makes sense. So this is through the roof. It's very water soluble. It's very high solubility rate. I'll compare it to some other compounds, so you can see what the difference is. Hydrolysis half-life is fairly long, greater than 35 days, so that's breaking down in water. And log KOW is a very important piece. We don't need to go into it, but basically it's how a compound can partition between a lipid and water. So this is an indicator if a compound is going to bioaccumulate. Is it going to move up through the trophic, through the food chain? Or is it, so that really gives you an idea if there's a bioaccumulation potential, which is important, especially in human health. So just to summarize these, to give you a bigger picture, here's some other compounds. Atrazine, everyone's heard of atrazine. It's a triazine herbicide used quite a bit, of course, on corn. You can see its water solubility, not as soluble as atrazine. It's KOW, so it's a little bit more. It's funny when you talk to people who aren't chemists, the easiest thing is it's stickier. So, which I'll explain in a minute. And then cypermethrin is a lot of you are campers. That's what they spray on your netting. So it's got a really low water solubility, of course, because if you're camping on your net, you don't want water to pull it off. And it has really high KOW, indicating it has potentially a fairly high bioaccumulation factor. But that's not always true. You're going to hear me talk. He's like, wait, you just said this, but it's doing this. Welcome to environmental chemistry. PCBs, here's common PCBs, same thing. We know they bioaccumulate quite readily through, right through the trophic food chains. But just quickly, you can see the different compounds here, because I want to get into just where these and how they react in the environment. Glyphosate, atrazine, they're herbicides. Fairly water soluble. This is an insecticide, a little bit different. So more of a sticky compound. So insecticides, you want them because you're not trying to kill a plant, you're trying to kill an organism. So you want an organism to take that up into their system and then affect some kind of function within cellular function or enzymatic function. So to give you a bit of, I wanted to look at the problem with the literature, going on Google and looking at different things, you can read lots of different things about the chemistry, what's happening with glyphosate, how it's being taken into the environment or up into humans, into cattle, into fodder, into different departments. But this is a fairly recent paper looking at, this was in Argentina, just looking at what's happening with this of glyphosate and this AMPA in surface waters. And so this just gives you a little background. They found it. Yeah, they found it in soil, surface water, and sediment. But the interesting thing with this compound is you think, hey, Erin, you just said it's water soluble. But why is this paper saying it's found on particular matter? So that's like someone who's in the watershed would know about organic compounds or particulate matter within the water body, or sediments. So sediment is not soil, but the sediment is your layer within the river or a lake. So it's interesting. And it looks like it does move with surface runoff with the movement of soil particles. So it looks like glyphosate actually absorbs the particles. But you just said it's not sticky. Wait a sec, Erin. You make up your mind. You're like, you ever think about it? But it's funny. This is a funny molecule. So it actually likes to compete with, I think it's with phosphate for a certain binding site on soil. So there's a couple, it's just the way the molecule is, it likes to actually form a bond. So it's more absorption. It's not actually partitioning or moving into that system. So it's kind of interesting. And they really show that this could be interesting even if something like this gets used, is looking at sediments as a potential source, or sorry, a potential sink of glyphosate. So I want to look at the big picture. Where is this stuff used? Where is it mostly used? Anybody? What's that?
Gardens.
In which?
Like
Gardens. Hardly any. Agriculture. Well, agriculture's number one. So, and then how does it get there? I think you showed a nice thing. Here's all your different pathways. And a good pathway, which is really interesting for anything that's contaminated, is like that surface runoff of a parking lot. It's amazing how much stuff, that's just sheet flow. There's no, it's just not even penetrating the soil, it goes straight into your water body, which, good talk on that. But this gives you an idea, there's diffuse and point type things, but a lot of it is, I'll show you in a couple of papers, a lot of the glyphosate that's getting into the US environment is via agriculture. And I'll show you some numbers in a minute. But here's your typical pathways. US has a lot of farm culture, farms all throughout the country. I've worked on some of these farms from Mississippi with cotton up to the Midwest with the corn cropping. And how do what do they do a lot? They spray. So there's a lot of spraying going on. And so how's it getting the environment? Via spray drift or direct spraying. Or of course, spray drift. I love this slide. It's kind of cool. Everyone goes, whoa, is that what really happens? We've not seen a spray plane, but it's kind of cool. Has anyone flown Delta before? Delta Air? Guess where they came from? That's what they did. Before they became Delta Air, that was their main business, was actually spraying down in the Mississippi Delta region. So it's kind of cool, where things come from. And of course, erosion, huge. Erosion is a big impact so that's runoff and erosion. In this case, something like glyphosate, if it's absorbed to a particular material, it's going to move off that soil and into your sediment or into your water body. So just to give you a big picture, US, this is fairly old, so it's gone up 2012. This is from USDA, one of their maps. Each dock represents about 25,000 acres. Just to give you an idea of application of, this is just herbicides. This isn't the insecticide map. And you can see, of course, it's focused right through, this is basically the Mississippi watershed. So if you're talking watersheds, I think that is the biggest watershed in the US. So quite interesting. It all comes right down there in the bottom between down in Louisiana. And I thought it'd be nice for you to see a glyphosate map. This is glyphosate usage around the country. It follows pretty much the same pattern. So just a paper to give you an idea of trends. So this was just published in 2016. I'll have to read the numbers for it. It's kind of nice looking from 74 to 2014. I'm Canadian, but I'll switch to pounds. Per annum, it was about during that year, it was about 1,400 pounds of glyphosate used. Now it's up to almost 300,000 pounds. So, and then your question here is, like, wow, how much is it non-agriculture? Where's percentage non-agriculture? Oh, we can't see it. So we're looking at 90% is ag, and the rest is basically you and I using it in our gardens or spraying our sidewalks and doing things like that. All these papers are available online, just so if you do want to look at this one's actually open access. You can actually look at that and have a read through it. It gives you nice coverage of what's been going on in the States for the last 30 years. And I can't do my math, it's 40 years, isn't it? 40 years, wow. So then you're wondering, how is this happening? Well, has anyone heard of Roundup Ready? So these are seeds that are resistant to, well, the plant, once it, of course, germinates, is resistant to the herbicide glyphosate. So they can spray this pre-emerge, meaning it's still in the ground. Post-emerge means it's up. And what this has allowed, there's a couple other things. This has caused a lot of no-till farming, because a lot of people, tilling is actually, can be another problem in farming, because now you're opening up the soil to the natural environment. Therefore, you could be losing some nutrients. And then, of course, rain events, you could be having runoff. This way, they can keep a root mass within the body, but still. So all these corn, soya, alfalfa, canola, cotton, kind of interesting. But the flip side of this, and you're seeing more and more, and especially in Europe, they've got a bunch of different species. This map is the best I can get. But within these regions, within Canada and the US, there's a bunch of crops that are not affected by glyphosate now. So they've built up, as you can see there, they built up some kind of resistance from, and as you may know, these are genetically modified crops. I think most of them, don't quote me on this, they're basically sterile seeds. So you have to go back to Monsanto to buy these seeds annually. So glyphosate drinking water, which is interesting. I think this is where Wayne might interject maybe in discussion. So the MCL, so that's your maximum contaminant limit, is 700 microgram per liter, so that's part per billion. This is 0.7 milligram per liter. So it's quite high. When you look at some of the data in the water, I'll show some, it's much lower, significantly lower than this 0.7 part per million. Does everyone know part per million? Visualize what part per million, part per billion mean? Yes? No? Put your hand up if you don't care, if you want to know. An easy way, go ahead.
What are you showing here?
So that's your maximum, was it MCL? I forgot. Maximum, that's put out by the water drinking guidelines.
That's the maximum that can be on our drinking.
Right, that's the max.
And that's
0.7 part per million. Right, or 700 part per billion. So basically, part per million could be I think it's a 10-gallon tank of fish tank, and then put 10,000 drops in. So 1 million drops, sorry. 1 drop into that tank, into that 10 gallons, gives you part per million. And if you go to 10,000 gallons, so a pool, and add a drop in, that's part per billion.
And you're saying it's high, but, visualize it as 1 drop a million.
Right, but how do chemicals work?
Right.
So it's very interesting. You say, well, you look at some other thresholds, look at arsenic, cyanide. You only need a little bit for it to actually have a toxic effect. So I'm saying it's high relative to what I've seen in most of the papers showing what's in the water columns. So it's a lot higher than I expected. I expected to see a lot more. Just with the way it behaves in the environment, I thought I'd see a little bit higher hits in the analytical data. But I can show you some of that.
Well, so you're saying that the government is setting limits too high?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying relative to what, it's high, it's much higher than what we're seeing in the environment. So that has to be so what they do is they take water samples at your intake plant and they look at every compound. And then if it's below that threshold, it's fine. So this is just the max they have set in the water treatment plants, drinking water plants. And then the WHO, so this is the International Agency for Research in Cancer, this is 2015, listed it as probably carcinogenic to humans. And there's a lot of fighting and debating going on this right now. So it's not written in stone, but it's interesting to see that it's finally there. For the longest time, if you go back to the earlier documents, this was just dismissed as a compound of not really that much concern.
I have another question. So how did they set that threshold?
Can you repeat
How do they set that threshold? That's based on, I think it's based on tox data that they use. I'm not 100% sure. I could look into that. I did know one time. Wayne, do you know?
No.
Jeff? It's based on tox data and potential effects, toxic LOX, so lowest observable.
I know the EPA had provided some guidance for maximum contaminant loads for drinking water supplies around the country.
This is through the Clean Water Act, so this is through, that's where these numbers come from. So all districts use these numbers. So. And this is a paper, another paper that just recently came out, and I'm sure that most of you have seen it. It's the most intensive sampling regime that happened from 2001 to 2010 by USGS, looking at surface waters, rainwater, soils, and groundwater around the country. And here's not the exact sampling map, but per state what they sampled for. So sediment precipitation. And to summarize some of these data of all the sites for the streams and groundwater, so we're looking at, let's look at maximum. Maximum for streams and maximum even for ditches and drains was 427. That's microgram per liter. So you got, that's 0.4, that's up there, but it's 0.4 milligram per liter. And here
So is that good or bad or?
it's below, I'm just comparing, it's below the MCL. I'm not saying it's good or bad. This talk isn't talking good or bad. This is just talking, these are the numbers. And, but this gives you an idea. So ditches and drains, where are they? Ditches and drains, generally, every agricultural field has a drainage ditch or a drain. So they're looking right at source. So interestingly, it'd be nice to look deeper into these data and look at time of sampling, which is important because it depends if there was an application or how long ago application was, or if there was a rain event. There's lots of different factors. So when you look at these data, you can't say, yep, we're all good. It's all depends. But this, at least here, they give you a nice coverage. So, but out of all the sites, only 39%, 50% of the sites actually had hits of glyphosate. Groundwater is only 5% of their sites. And then a fairly high hit, which makes sense, right near a source, was roughly 70% hits of actually glyphosate detection. And in addition, the degradation product was there as well. And I didn't talk about it before, but there's no MCL for AMPA, and there's nothing with World Health Organization on that.
AMCA is one of the breakdown components.
Breakdown product.
And there is no MCL for that, even though that's what glyphosate breaks down.
Correct. And a lot of the times, degradation products are not part of that listing. So because in some cases, it's assumed it's going to break down to something else. But as we know with different compounds, a classic is DDT. DDT breaks down to DDE. And DDE is everywhere. And it is responsible for many of the things on having that compound banned, especially with pushing what Carson did back in the early 60s. So go ahead.
Erin, I had a question. Out our way, there's a lot of agricultural fields all next to rivers, but a lot of farmers are now choosing to go organic, so but we know this is in the soil, right? Or they're using the soil, so
Right.
how long before, do you have any idea how long before that soil becomes organic, or do you have any idea? Because all this organic soils next to the rivers, like you said, everything's getting washed to our rivers.
So the question was, fields that in the past used glyphosate, and now they want to go to a more natural or say more organic farming. And what happens with that soil? Wayne and I actually had that conversation before. I do not know the answer to that. I'll be honest, how long it would take, depending on, and I think it comes down to what you amend your fields with. And as a chemist, I would be doing sampling of the field and watching it to see before you even start using your field. But it's interesting, that's a question that I get, just on pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides used in our fields. But a lot of fields, property owners are along waterways. And a lot of the waterways don't have buffer strips. So, and that's where with the impaired waterways around the U.S. That's where a lot of the funding and where I started looking at this and looking at vegetated systems and different best management practices at the edge of field to reduce loadings like that. This is more for runoff. Spray drift is a whole different animal because now you got sprayers, but they're doing a good job on new types of spraying applicators and now to reduce that drift onto those water bodies. But and that's exactly where all my work in the Mississippi Delta was.
We need to move on, but still that's a...
Yeah, I just didn't understand one concept was the cow.
KOW, yeah.
Was very low on this chemical.
I told you I'm going to tell you two different things.
But then earlier was mentioned that a very high percentage of people have this in their bodies.
Jeff mentioned that earlier today.
So how does that go?
Well, so first of all, so one reason I brought up, I'm going to say two different things. You're going to be, wait a second, you said it doesn't. So a lot of times KOW can be associated with another term called KOC. It likes to bind organic carbon. In this case, this compound has a more of a different type of binding process going on with that competition with phosphorus. Into the body, into the human body, I've been doing some of the reading. I know that Jeff has mentioned some papers, and it's found in blood, found in breast milk, found in young children, correct? Urine samples. But just quickly on that, a lot of the rat studies, and there's right now even transferring some of the maybe into these studies that the body, the human body, and say they use the rat as a model, of course, that it's moving quite quickly into the feces, so into your intestine, and or into your urine. So it's not really accumulating in the body. But the jury's out. I can't opine on what's going on in that system. But for uptake into humans, food. So I think that's your...
But Monsanto would use the argument it's got a low KOW, so it should be safe to us.
They may. I don't know what argument they'd use, but right now, from what I can see, this is not, I can't back this up with a paper at this point in time, but you know, with high application rates the way it is, you've got animals eating feed.
Well, with the seeds, that's promoting them to use it even more because you can make sure there's no herbicide at all to hurt your crop at all, right? You have these designed seeds.
Right, but your main question is how is it getting into us?
Right.
Right.
Well,
So it's definitely food, and I think they're showing it through livestock because uptake. So it's being retained long enough, you know, because and then it's on our food, or it's somehow still part of that systemically. So.
Okay, so last but not least, Cathy Kristofferson is going to provide now.
And Paula.
I'm sorry, and
Paula.
and Paula are going to provide an overview of where we are with the gas pipeline projects here in New England and why well-informed grassroots groups all over New England are opposing some of these infrastructure projects for good reason.
Sure. So this update will be for about the last month coming forward. So I didn't do a lot of the background. Wayne actually gave you a good overview of the issues with the Kinder Morgan. This is a map of Massachusetts and a little bit of New Hampshire. These are the 5 pipeline projects that have been proposed for our Commonwealth in the last couple of years. So this red was the Kinder Morgan Northeast Energy Direct that Wayne was talking about, and he was giving you that little bit right around there, I think. This is the other Kinder Morgan project, the Connecticut expansion. It has already been approved by FERC, and they are trying to start construction on that project. It is completely contained in the town of Sandusfield, and over half of it is in Otis State Forest, which is a nice forest with 400-year-old old growth in it. And they're trying to go in there. So that is where the Commonwealth is trying to defend its constitutionally protected land that is protected under Article 97. I wasn't going to go into that, but I'll just toss that in there tonight, since we're being all academic with that last presentation. This is, the blue lines are those of the spectra. They have 3 projects. This is the West Roxbury lateral, also approved. If you've seen any of the stuff in the news about arrests happening, that would be this little section in here, part of the Algonquin incremental market. That's what AIM stands for. This is the little piece of it that's in Massachusetts, mainly Dedham and West Roxbury. Over here we have a compressor station in Weymouth. And that is the only piece of the Atlantic Bridge project that is left in Massachusetts. The other interesting component of the Atlantic Bridge project is that the Maritimes Northeast pipe that you folks have here, part of this project is a reversal of the flow from coming from Canada to Massachusetts to going up to Canada. And it's not really difficult to imagine why they would be reversing the flow. The other project, the latest project, is the Access Northeast, which has 5 components here in Massachusetts. It has a piece along here which is called the Q1 loop, and it's a loop because it is another pipe alongside an existing pipe. This is a lateral, so this is pipe going into an electrical easement. This down here is a compressor station in the town of Rehoboth. This is a little bit of greenfield pipe, which means pipeline going in where, there are people's yards. There's no existing easements. And a lot of it is coming along people's front lawn in between their house and the road. And it's going down to a huge LNG storage facility, liquefaction and all. The 2 tanks that are going in here will hold 6.8 billion cubic feet. To give you some idea, so they are 290 feet across, 290 feet tall. So basically you could pick up one of these guys and set it on Gillette Stadium, because that's sort of the size of a football field. So there are 2 of those going in. It will be the largest LNG facility on the East Coast, and it's going into a residential neighborhood in Acushnet. The other piece is the I-8 loop, so it's also along an existing pipe. It's coming to the existing compressor station in Weymouth. It exists in their mind because it is already proposed by an unapproved project. So this is what we commonly refer to as illegal segmentation of projects, to make it look like a small environmental impact when you first propose it, and then immediately propose a follow-on project to more than double its size, which is what they're doing. There's a very, in the world of compressor stations, it's like 7,000 coming up to 20 or something like that. Yes, ma'am?
Who's approving all of these?
Everything that we have on this screen is interstate, so that means it involves more than one state, which means the federal government is in charge, which is FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, better known as Rubber Stamping Commission.
And does Massachusetts itself have any control over it?
There is some control over these. You're welcome to chip in. All of the towns along the route, their Conservation Commission will be able to permit the work that is within wetlands. So the Wetlands Protection Act is not preempted. The majority of the rest of the laws of a municipality in the state are preempted. The 401 under the Natural Gas Act. The 401 water quality is the responsibility of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So the state will be issuing them or not a 401. And the state, for this project, they will be doing a MEPA review. So the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, which is similar to the NEPA of the national version. I didn't really want to go all acronym on you here. This project here, the existing or non-existing compressor station, there's currently some contention with Weymouth that it was decided by the Baker administration that this didn't warrant the full review because it's just a little tiny compressor and it's not a big impact. But if you look at it in the reality that this is all one big project, it should be reviewed. And it's just sort of the shell game that they play by carving off things, which is what we think they've done over here with this one, right? They carved off a little one, which has actual, in the reality of the impact of that Sandusfield project, it's a huge impact on that little tiny town of 900 some odd people. But they took it off the big pipeline and made it look smaller. And this one also didn't get a full review. This one is so egregious in Conservation Commission folks' minds. They're taking over 1 million gallons out of a great pond just to test out the pipe. They pull it out.
That's typical. It's typically about 1 million gallons for testing these pipes.
Right.
And they look for the closest water body, but they don't discharge it back into the pond because it's somewhat contaminated. So they have to discharge it into the uplands where they think it will filter, depending on what happens. But, so like Cathy said, I mean, people said you stopped the pipeline to a lot of us, you know, it's because of the group we're involved with. But you can see there's a lot more going on.
Right,
People
so
need to pay attention.
all of this in blue, except for the AIM, which has been approved but is currently being stopped almost daily with arrest actions, is underway. So the scoping sessions and everything to do with the federal government that's reviewing this are complete, but there are more process to come along. But just to give you the span of where, just in our state, we are facing a lot of new pipeline work. And this is the written version of everything we just said. So there's 22 towns on that Access Northeast that are being impacted by all of these sorts of things. The resource reports were due in April, and maybe they'll be out in late July. So the Northeast Energy Direct, like Wayne was saying, was just withdrawn on May 24th. After a couple of years of our life. It's our new hobby. So we've learned a lot of towns doing this. The other interesting thing for this area was the Constitution pipeline, which was also approved by the FERC it's a Pennsylvania to New York pipeline. The interest that we have in the Commonwealth is that the New York denied the 401 water quality, and they don't often deny them, anybody. So it has presently stopped that pipeline because they can't proceed without that certificate. So the big question is, do we need new pipelines? But Wayne already answered that with no, because the one that you have in this area is half empty. But so the Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey did a study to see if we need it for electric reliability, because the proponents of these pipelines generally start off their talks with the threats of rolling blackouts. But the study found that no, we don't need it. We can get our way to full green energy by using energy efficiency, demand response. Are you folks familiar with what demand response generally is? It is sort of, we have smart, you might have something like smart meters that figure out when the demand is really high and can automatically dial back demand on everybody and free up a lot of power. So if, say, the big time of the year when the infamous vortex problem we had in 2014 with electricity prices being really high was because when about 6 o'clock on really, really cold days when businesses are all still open, drawing electricity, so gas is being used to generate electricity, and folks' automatic thermostats go on and start drawing natural gas to heat their homes. That's when the biggest pull from all directions of energy generation is. So in that time, you could imagine that if you had a smart meter and everybody's thermostat was turned down, say 1 degree, it could free up a whole bunch of power and nobody would really notice it. Right? So there's sort of these kind of, so there's demand, so there's some response, and that's sort of where that's coming from. The existing gas pipelines, LNG, and low carbon imports, these are sort of what they all compared. And they found that energy efficiency and demand response. Energy efficiency, right in the Commonwealth, we call it our first fuel. 5 years now, I guess we're first in the nation in energy efficiency. So let's just stop with the low-hanging fruit and get on with some really serious energy efficiency and demand response.
I was just going to say about the LNG. The people that do LNG in this area, they were our friends because they just like us, we didn't want all this new infrastructure. The LNG can serve as a temporary, as they call it, a bridge. So we didn't need all this $5 billion, $3 billion infrastructure. So they were actually our friends. There were lawsuits, they were at the hearings, they were testifying. So they did not want to see this new infrastructure going in because they want to keep their business active. But we only want to, we want to be smart about how we use that LNG. But it is there as a backup.
In 2014, the ISO, the independent system operator for the grid, did not use LNG or wasn't allowed to use it. In 2015, they were, and magically all of the huge prices went away. So it's just sort of being smart in the use and not bringing in 50 to 80-year infrastructure of new gas pipelines. If we bring in new gas, can we comply with the Global Warming Solutions Act? So the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2008 mandates that we must reduce our emissions by 25% in 2020 and 80% by 2050. And these are the rates that we were doing in 2009, so the year after the act came into being. So we need to be aiming for down here. And what we found just last month, the Globe did a study or reported on a study that was done. So for the first time in 5 years, power plants have increased their emissions. And it's from all of the new gas power plants that have come in. So this is not the trend that we need to see. We have gone up. So the folks in Boston need to figure that out. Also last month, the lawsuit that was brought by the Conservation Law Foundation, Mass Energy, and 4 youth, one of whom's name is Kane, took the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection to court because they were not regulating the Global Warming Solution Act to get us to those mandated reductions, and they won. So now the DEP will need to figure out how we can reduce our emissions and still comply. And you'll imagine we'll be all back to where the AG figured it out already, and that will be energy efficiency and demand response and those sorts of things. At the Senate oversight hearing following that court case, the Acadia Center put out this slide, which is pretty self-descriptive. More gas pipelines are irreconcilable with climate commitments. And the red, the little bits of red, are the West Roxbury that I talked about, the AIM. The green is the Spectra pipeline that's being proposed right now. So were that to go in right about here, we would start failing on our mandated reductions. And the red purpley slashes were where we would be, and they're sort of slashed out because The NED was canceled by then, but we will be at 183% of what we can have with just the one Spectra pipeline that's proposed. So that sort of would make us fail. So if we don't meet the gas, will make us fail to meet it. Why would we build them? So this is a map of the proposed pipeline projects for the Northeast. It's just the Northeast. You can see this is the Axis Northeast, this is the AIM, and this is the Tennessee, and the Spectra is right here. And these little red lines is the Maritimes Northeast changing direction. And the
Is
rest,
everyone aware of that they would change the direction of the Maritime and Northeast pipeline to bring the gas, instead of bringing it down from Canada, they're going to be sending it up to Canada to like Goulburn to Nova Scotia, where there's some huge LNG facilities being constructed. And actually you can see it right here. Just go to Pier Day or Goulburn, Nova Scotia, Bearhead, big huge LNG facilities. And they're planning, they need this gas because they're, the Department of Energy gave them permission to export it from the US into Canada, and then from Canada they've got all kinds of customers in Asia, all over the world. It will be exported.
so at both Spectra and Kinder Morgan open houses, we've asked their representatives if they plan to export the gas. And completely they say no. We have no plans of that. But yet this is a Spectra's picture, and this is a Kinder Morgan photo. Right from their own, we didn't make these. And they all have the same leapfrog, right? Coming in from Marcellus, up to Drake, up to Nova Scotia. Coming in the other way, Spectra generally comes from the south up through New Jersey and out this way, and Kinder Morgan comes from Pennsylvania through Wright, New York, and along, here's Wright, and they have the same 1, 2, 3. It made us understand why Spectra called that little project the Atlantic Bridge. So if we don't meet it, it will increase our emissions. It's not really for us. Why would we want to pay for it? And so, is everyone in here familiar with what's being called the pipeline tax? I think you guys are getting it on the TV. I don't really have a TV, so I'm amused. The pipeline tax was an idea that was brought by the Baker administration's Department of Energy and Resources to find a way to get gas pipelines built by proposing that there's some kind of cost recovery mechanism, which would be that electric ratepayers who use electricity that's generated by gas would pay for the construction of those pipelines. It's a somewhat unprecedented. Usually people that have natural gas in their homes pay for gas pipeline construction with some sort of charge on their bill, but no one has ever made electric ratepayers pay for gas pipelines. So
It had an earlier name though, right?
it was called a tariff back in 2013-14 in Governor Patrick's time. They thought they might have some sort of tariff paid by all 6 New England states, because we sort of work as a region, the ISO New England, and so they thought they would do that. Massachusetts being the largest consumer in the New England states of energy was a huge portion of the pie for the tariff. And when there was a lot of pushback from the citizens, Governor Patrick sort of soured on the idea of a regional tariff, and the folks that figured they couldn't really get it through FERC anyway sort of backed off on that. Then
He
when
was
the-
in beg, remember? People
Yeah.
from the governor of Maine was begging him to please turn around, please, support this. We need this tariff. we need this to happen, because it was the governors of New England or their staff who agreed this is how it's all going to come down. We caught wind of it and started fighting and pushing back. But, you know, he didn't, he stayed with us. He said he will not support it, and he didn't.
So that forced the states to go off and try to find a legislative or regulatory way to do it on their own. So 6 states, Connecticut and Rhode Island, I believe, have passed some sort of legislation to, in Maine, Mr. LePage has no problem taxing his people. Here, the Baker administration, like I say, went through the DOER down to the DPU to come up with this cost mechanism, which will force us all to pay for 20-year commitments of purchasing gas moving forward. So whether they actually use the gas or not, you could all be Eversource and National Grid customers would be forced to pay for this. Because the Spectra Pipeline project, the Access Northeast, is actually a partnership of Spectra Energy, the gas pipeline purveyor, and National Grid and Eversource, the electricity purveyor. So they're sort of, oh yeah, buying the gas from themselves and having you pay for it. And as was mentioned earlier, the Senate version of the omnibus bill just came out on Friday. Today was the deadline for amendments. And there were 107 amendments, came out about 1:30, so I haven't actually had time to read all of them. We know that amendment number 1 is from Senator Jalen. She submitted an amendment that would somewhat ban what we're calling the pipeline tax. So we don't want it, we shouldn't have it. These are some other amendments that would be really good. Because the pipeline opposition is not just no, right? We're just not on the no side. We like to be on what the yes side we would like. So there is Amendment 1. Senator Tarr, up our way here, has a nice amendment to increase offshore wind to 2,400 megawatts. Senator Eldridge has amendments in there to try to do something about the Energy Facility Siting Board, that they pay attention to the environment and public health and the impact of the residents around infrastructure. Because presently they just sort of look at siting energy facilities so that they can bring the lowest cost energy. Not a lot of thought on those folks that will have football stadium size storage tanks in their backyard. Senator Cream and Eldridge have 3 amendments together that would raise the net metering cap for solar and reinstate the retail rate for low-income and community-shared solar projects. Because presently, the Baker administration, the latest bill that was passed, I think in July, was it passed? In March or something, anyway, a few months ago for the caps, cut the rate of the net metering 40%. So when you have projects and you produce power, right, with the, like you've seen probably a lot, Solar City or whatever on the roof, you sell that energy that you have generated back. You used to get the retail rate, and now they're getting 40% less than retail rate of the gas, which then the electric company turns around and sells at 100%. The last amendment, the only legislator to get an amendment on the House version of the bill was Lori Ehrlich, right? She got a great amendment on for the gas leaks to repair them, because you've probably seen in the Globe, there's a great amount of gas lost through leaks. There's not a lot of care to fix them by the gas distribution companies, because the customers have to pay for the gas that's lost through leaks. So once it leaves and it's headed towards your house, you pay for it. And if it leaks into the atmosphere and brings on global warming sooner, then, oh, but they haven't lost any money, so they don't fix them. There are some amendments. Lori Ehrlich's has the First Amendment to get it fixed, and Senator Eldridge has strengthening on the repair policies, making sure that they're all fixed, not just the ones that are imminent to explode, and to add some worker safety provisions to that legislation.
And there are handouts that have the bills on them for call to action.
With those amendments?
Yes, they're like quarter sheets, it's simple, you can hand them out, take extras.
There's also some other handouts about
Yep.
the bill as well, and we're asking everyone tonight to consider calling their state senator, Liasion, or whomever.
Right, so it's the senators up now. The bill will be debated on Thursday. So it would be good to give them a call tomorrow. So whoever your senator is, that would be great. You can go online on masslegislature.gov and look up the bill number, 2372, and click the tab that says amendments, and you can see all 107. If you like any of them, you can ask that they be supported as well. It's a bill to promote energy diversity and bring in good renewable energy, not the old easy button that we used to call the gas pipelines.
That's not just the staples.
Not the steep.
Are there any amendments that are specifically against the pipelines?
The only thing I noticed that was, there is the pipeline tax, so Amendment 1 to not make ratepayers pay. I saw Senator Montigny had a amendment restricting siting of those LNG tanks. There is already an amendment to the budget restricting siting of pipelines themselves. And there was an amendment to a different bill restricting the siting of compressor stations. The neighborhood that Weymouth compressor station in is it's sitting on a little spit out in the ocean where it's a 14-acre site. Normally the pipeline companies try to get somewhere around 100 acres, and they sort of put those very industrial facilities in the middle so that there's a good buffer of trees. They're very loud, they run 24/7. Their lights are on. And for the folks in Western Mass on the NED pipeline, the Kinder Morgan people said to them one day, "You folks are like North Korea. There's no lights, and we look on Google Earth, we can't even see where you are." And they're like, "That's why we live out here." Right? And because they were proposing two big, huge, 80,000 horsepower compressor stations, and one of them was up on a high ridge. And so that would sort of be glowing there all day and night.
Can't see the stars.
You can't see the stars. So it's sort of...
And the noise is just the running.
Yeah, it's at 55 decibels or something nonstop. But that's sort of the average. The other problem that compressor stations have is that they, as standing operating procedure, not by accident or anything, they blow off raw methane. And they sort of apparently sound like gunshots when they go off. Because the folks at the Agawam station that exists already, they submitted some very interesting comments to the FERC docket. And that compressor station, which is part of the Sandusfield project, was going to be increased the size. That they have a lot of things scaring people. Yes, sir.
Maybe you already mentioned it, but whatever, it was a separate bill, and maybe it became part of the omnibus bill about taxpayers paying for, taxpayers not paying for, ratepayers, I'm getting this all wrong,
Okay.
not paying for gas leaks.
Yes, that would be all in those gas leak bill.
Not the omnibus bill.
It would be, it is proposed as some of the amendments, so it does need to get in there. I think that the bills themselves have been put out as diversity, and they're trying to get away from the fossil fuel, but both in the House and the Senate, the legislators have tried to put some fossil fuel restrictions in there. So we'll have to see if it makes it through. It'll be a good debate. You can watch it online live. It's very exciting. Yes, ma'am.
Sounds a little confusing, the fact you mentioned Attorney General, she's again saying, they did a report saying it wasn't only the gas pipeline.
Yep.
And yet, how the Baker administration is for letting these companies proceed. So can you explain a little bit the confusion for me and my
Sure.
understanding?
Well, the Baker administration and the Attorney General are two separate entities, sort of. There were multiple studies done about whether we needed more gas. They, most of them seem to be done by proponents of one side or the other. And so the Attorney General tried to take on an impartial view to see if we needed it. Remember that the Attorney General is the ratepayer advocate in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Sort of like New Hampshire, they have a separate office for that, but in our Commonwealth, it is the Attorney General. So as the ratepayer advocate, she studied whether the ratepayers would be, how they would be impacted, and was there electric reliability without adding new gas pipelines. Because the Access Northeast project, as it's proposed, is almost 100% for the generation of electricity. They don't have a lot of customers to provide what is called LDCs, so local distribution companies, which are the folks that distribute gas for gas, not gas to generate electricity. So she was studying whether we needed new pipelines to bring in enough gas to create electricity. And in their study, they found that no, they don't. The Baker administration, on the other hand, thinks that we do, and they think that because the electric utilities want to assume exactly this much risk in signing those contracts, they want no risk, zero. And I've sat and watched them testify at the State House that they will accept no risk. So the risk is being removed from the utilities and put on the ratepayer back by making the ratepayers fund the construction of those pipelines to bring in the gas. So for 20 years, it's a 20-year commitment for a precedent agreement to purchase gas. Yes.
I just want to point out also that the price of the gas per cubic foot is about, was it $6 to $8 right now? Maybe $5?
Could be
$5 a cubic foot? 100 cubic feet. Okay, in Europe, it's right now, it's somewhere between $14 to $16, right? And in parts of South America, some parts of Africa, it's even higher than that. So what you have is a very enticing business where you can export cheap natural gas from fracked wells in Pennsylvania, through liquefied natural gas tankers in the Canadian Maritimes to international ports all over the world, and you're making a 100% markup.
Right.
So why would you want to deal with us? Why would you want to deal with us, right, in the U.S.?
We're just in the
It's
way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then the cheap gas, we would have to compete with the global market to buy it.
That's right.
So
So it's actually going to increase,
Exactly.
our cost of natural gas is going to go up as a result of this.
That's part of our argument, has been all along.
Yeah,
Because
because this is their map. These are their pictures, not our wild and crazy theories. This is their map with the 3 arrows. They all have them.
It's 9 o'clock. I want to make sure we honor people's time. Do we have some questions? Otherwise, we can break up into less formal conversation on lemonade and cookies. Thank you both for this presentation. Do you have the cards or the little information about the amendments?
yes. Are they on here?
Yep. Half of them are on the table and half of them are.
And any questions? Yeah,
This is
we can break up into, yes, sir?
No, I want to.
Okay, we'll take that. I'll also say that Amendment 48 in this energy bill that's being debated would put a price, carbon, it's a carbon pricing which is very exciting. It's really the direction we need to go. So that's also something to consider. Ken Down was, I think the one who was that. Well, he's the, who is it? No, excuse me, it was,
It's been the other TV guy.
yeah. All right. Yes, Jim, go ahead.
What's Salem doing about, we talked about Flint, or that was the
Do you have a sign-up sheet with that?
They have one, I think, on the table.
that was the lead.
Do you have a meeting?
Avoiding Flint, right.
My name's Steve.
Why, what is Salem doing to test our water for lead?
I can't speak too much what the individual towns are, but Flint is a real wake-up call, and I can guarantee you that the city has been going crazy testing the pipes. Luckily, in Salem and Beverly, the treatment plant up on Mountain Lake does a pretty good job and keeps the pH just about right, that they don't feel it's a risk. They did find in a couple of the school bubblers, for those of you who are local, or water fountains, some elevated levels, but those were restricted to the lead solder in those water fountains. But they've pretty much determined that there's no risk in Salem and Beverly because the chemistry of the water isn't such that it's going to mobilize the lead in the old pipes.
It's also an issue of, I mean, probably the biggest threats of contamination happened a long time ago in some of the older parts of the system. That's what I heard at least. I don't know. But the idea, for Salem and Beverly, the biggest concern is surface water protection, what's called SWAPs. Our water system, water supply board has been involved with fairly detailed surface water protection plans over the last 10 to 15 years, especially after the Valley fly ash debacle. I don't know if people realize, but there was the old Salem power plant was dumping coal fly ash, or the waste byproduct of their combustion, into an unlined granite pit above Windsor Lake, and it was washing down into Windsor Lake. And this happened for 3 decades. So I mean, there was a lot of contamination that didn't probably enter the system and it washed through. So in some ways, Jim, we had a Flint-like we may have had a Flint-like episode, but it happened a long time ago.
What's
But
surface water protection?
Surface water protection means basically paying attention to runoff issues. Well, I mean, we could talk about surface water protection.
Yeah, the state regulates the land use around our public drinking water supplies. And so surface water protection refers to controlling what happens on that land that could impact our drinking water supplies. So that every reservoir, every well has a buffer zone. The map I showed, the pipeline that has a purple on it, those are the protection areas for all of our drinking water supplies. So in theory, what you do on that land is regulated by drinking water.
So the idea that you would build a gas pipeline that would require, biannual treatments of herbicide for as long as that pipeline is there, in your surface water protection area, it's just following. It's just ridiculous. All right?
Quick
Yeah.
question, where is the natural gas coming from for the natural gas power plant here in Salem?
My understanding, and don't hold me to this, but my understanding based on discussing this, asking that very question to the owners of the plant, developers, is that the gas for the new plant is coming from Canadian Maritimes from a conventional source. So they are not purchasing fracked gas. They're not purchasing gas that's a result of hydro fracking. They are purchasing from a well-established conventional source in Nova Scotia in that area.
However, they have applied, as we just heard, to reverse that line. And if Spectra goes through, that will happen. So our gas for Salem will happen from Pennsylvania because all the flow will be to Canada.
Yeah, if they reverse the line, all that's okay. That's exactly right. Yeah. Which is something I think we follow up with the others of the plant about, because that's outrageous. Yep. Hi, Brad.
So I wanted to make a point. I was going to ask Cathy about this, but I've been involved in this issue since February, just the last few months. But it's fascinating to go to the DPU hearings, people protesting the pipelines, and hundreds of people that spoke out in that time period. And there was one guy, I don't remember if it was in Linfield or Haverhill, he was a retired MIT physicist, and he was talking about a byproduct of these compressor blowdowns. It's a byproduct, a lead byproduct called polonium-210. And it's extraordinarily toxic. You know, a gram would kill 10 million people. So if you look at the infrastructure we have, even though the NED's gone away temporarily, if the tariff comes back in, which the governor could do, despite the language in the omnibus bill, that pipeline would be back online. And these dangers to our personal health, you can talk about Flint, but you know, there's other things going on, the leaks in the pipes that we have. The methane leaks are extraordinary.
Absolutely.
And so it just goes on and on and on. And forums like this are critical to have, you know, the television and people to talk about these issues. I've learned so much. And Cathy, I wanted to ask you if you remember that guy who got it was at the end. It was before Rich Callender spoke.
Yeah.
And he's talked about polonium-210, it's a lead byproduct from these compressor stations, you know, in the neighborhoods where these people are living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of the infrastructure either leaks or releases raw methane, bringing along whatever chemicals are not removed. They say that is filtered after it's fracked, right? Because we don't know what chemicals are in the fracking because that's proprietary. And it's supposed to be filtered, but whatever doesn't filter out can be released either through leaks in the distribution or transportation system, but the valve stations, the meter stations, the compressor stations, all of these where they either up the pressure or decrease the pressure. Compressor stations up it, valve stations, meter stations lower it. They release the gas, raw methane, off into the air. And so whatever comes along also is released into the air. And we all know walking around the city streets, you can smell the gas, which we understand that's not the gas, that's the mercaptan that they put in so that you can smell it. But we know that it's being released.
I wanted to say too, Senator Lovely, we met with her just yesterday, Tom was there, but she's very supportive of the clean energy language in the omnibus bill, but she wants to hear from her constituents.
That's why I'm interested.
It's a great point. Our good politicians need to hear from us. Seth Moulton, we dragged him kicking and screaming on this issue. He was repeating the Kinder Morgan.
Yeah.
But he was repeating the Kinder Morgan language right up until about a week before they withdrew. And then he took credit for them withdrawing, which was remarkable to me. I mean, I'm so glad of his stance on guns last week, but there's some things we need to remind our politicians about. Certainly Laura Ehrlich and Joan Lovely's are great.
We've heard that, didn't we, Fred? We've heard that across the country. Senators, people were stepping, they weren't giving their opinion or stepping back, and all of a sudden it's like, then the constituents started making the phone calls and calling and getting after them. It made a difference, a huge difference.
And I think that they have that issue down where the LNG in that sort of area is right now on the spectrum, because Joe Kennedy III is not opposed to those projects. And he sort of has the same story that we heard from Mr. Middleton, that we need this gas as a bridge. It's sort of a bridge to nowhere, right? 50 to 80-year infrastructure to get you a couple of years is ridiculous, with 20-year commitments on the ratepayer back.
Anyway, thank you all very much. Please, there's still some cookies and chips left, or lemonade. Thank you to all three of our speakers.